Okay, welcome everyone. Yes, but you're very quiet. Yeah, oh no, that's perfect. Great. Okay, so welcome everyone to week 4. We're talking about decision making and accountability and roles, which is apparently the favorite subject of people at Consensus from what we've been hearing. So we're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to do some participatory exercises, and we're going to have Alana Irving, one of the founders of Lumio and an amazing woman who knows a lot about decision making, join us at the top of the hour. So please, if you do have questions coming up, I don't know if any of you were able to join the call that Brian and Lisa were in today about decision making, but hopefully we can just jam with Alana, even if you've got challenges you're facing about specific approaches to decision making or things that are going on in your teams. There might be a time to do a bit of a case clinic, and we'll get some practice at that as well in this call. So we're going to check in, of course, and we'll have a bit of time today to go into our teams for the week to talk about the assignment, because we didn't do that last week, and we think it's probably quite essential for all of you to at least have 10 minutes to talk about how you're going to work together and to do the assignment. And also, if just after we check in, we'll just make a couple of minutes to see if anything's progressing along about how you're thinking of doing your blog or podcast or making your artifact about SO101. And yeah, here we are. I'm really tired, but I'm already getting more energized by being on the call with you all. So the check-in question is, so just when you think of, when you consider decision-making, or when it comes to decision-making, what is the feeling that comes up for you when you hear those words, decision-making? So just talking about the feeling and saying a few words about that, and I'll drop that check-in question into the chat. I miss not feeling. And great. Would anyone like to start? Susan, go.
Relief.
Do you want to describe that and why relief? It's more than a one-word.
Okay. All right. I think, yeah, I was just really paying attention to actually what the feeling was that came up. And it was somewhere between transparency and like, okay, all right. So now if I can see how and who is making the decision, that's kind of all I need. I really don't need to know what process you're using or whether or not I'm included. It's more like, okay, right. So, and I guess that I'm doing that within the context of assuming that I'm in a trusted team. But assuming I'm in a trusted team, assuming we know what each other's roles and accountabilities are, assuming we've made commitments to each other, when I hear the words decision making in that context, relief is what comes up for me.
Nice. Relief. Okay, so we're talking about the feeling that comes up when you consider decision making. Who would like to go next?
I can go next.
Josh. We'll go Josh, then Camilla. Sorry, I saw his hand first.
So going off of what Susan was saying, trust was what came up for me. Like Susan, you said you assume that you're in a trusted team, but when I think about decision making in my team, most decisions in my team aren't made by me, or I'm not involved in the decision. So I really need to trust my team. So that's what came up for me.
Interesting. Camilla, go ahead.
I mean, I don't have feelings so much as I have questions. And it's that what does the decision making pertain to? How does the decision making affect the team? and who's making the decision.
Okay, thank you. Any feelings on decision making for anyone else? Lisa.
For me, I think the thing that comes up is curiosity. Like, I think it's always really interesting to have divergence and like different ideas about things, and then sort of see, yeah, what new creativity and collective intelligence can be brought to something. And then when a decision's made that you couldn't have thought of yourself, it's like, oh, cool. Okay, cool.
Great. Maybe I can put your curious thought into a feeling of excitement. Who was going next?
Oh, I can go. Oh, Tanya,
Okay, we'll go
Tanya can
Tanya,
go.
then Thomas.
Yeah.
Good noticing.
I would say, well, it was interesting. The feeling was actually dread, but the one thing that I do like about decision making is that once the decision is made, there's real clarity, and I feel very relieved, and it actually allows me to do what I'm really good at, which is executing, creating kind of a plan to execute.
For me, it's about building the foundations for a really solid decision. And I personally I don't care who makes the decision as long as it's the sum of the whole, or some specialists. But then what comes up for me, the other side of it is, I was in the Apple store getting my laptop replaced. I had no idea, but the Apple company, also Stripe, they have all their emails as transparent. I didn't realize that Apple did it as well. Well, that's what the employee was telling me. But yeah, I guess if you've got transparent email trails, then you can have some type of audit trail on how a decision gets made. But for me, yeah, as long as it's got something like that, then it has the seeds for foundations for those decisions, for people that stand behind those decisions.
Okay, thank you. I saw Samantha and Edson's hand go up before as well. And then we'll go to Brian. Edson, go ahead.
So I think Lisa already said curiosity. I guess I really feel a lot of curiosity in terms of, I like to try to understand what were all the variables and the reasons to take certain decisions, especially to know in the future, if I have to take a similar decision, what I need to consider for that. And when somebody takes a decision and I can know the reasons, I feel safe. Like, oh, okay, it was a good decision. Yeah.
Nice. Feeling safe. Samantha, did you want to go next?
So in terms of like my immediate team that I meet with on a daily basis, I think normally when it comes to decisions, I almost by default assume that I'm not going to get asked or like anybody's going to follow the advice process with me. So it's just like, okay, I'll do as I'm told, because I haven't actually been in the situation where people follow the advice process and ask me for my input whenever there's a big decision to be made. So anxiety, maybe frustration.
Anxiety. Yeah, anxiety and frustration. Hearing you loud and clear. Brian, did you want to go next?
Sure. I do second anxiety, but I also am feeling pretty optimistic. But yeah, definitely worry. The reason I worry about it is because as a growing team, it's a pretty important power dynamic that plays out either implicitly or explicitly. And if you don't choose to do anything related to it as a team, it just will happen naturally anyways. So yeah, mindful curation of decision making as a team is something that's really bubbling for me. And there's anxiousness around that because yeah, how do you balance things like organic versus inorganic methods, constraining things but keeping things open? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
I can go.
That's not me. Go ahead.
I would echo anxiety. That was the initial feeling. It was like, for me, it's like not knowing what the right decision is, which is probably part of another feeling for me, which is like wanting to have it be co-collaborate, like a co-creative exercise. And then what Brian is saying, which is wanting to do that well. If it's going to be a collaborative exercise, like how to really engage people in a way that makes it a meaningful collaboration when it comes to making a decision.
Thank you and welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Mary?
Okay, so I could add something a little different. I mean, just like at a personal level, I have a hard time making decisions. And I second guess my decisions a lot. And then, but I always feel relieved once I've like really, so I can be stubborn too, like once I've made a decision, not seeing the other side, just from my own personal style, just adding that in.
Thanks for bringing in the personal. My favorite. Travis, did you want to go?
Yeah, a lot of points were covered here, but I actually think a lot about efficiency in terms of decision making, and so I tend to want to make sure that it is a reflection of the whole, like making sure there is some sort of consensus. I think about the efficiency because it's the worst feeling to have not made a decision and to be like, I think like really far past a deadline, at least for me personally. And then the one thing though, the caveat to that is I'm only willing to do that as long as the decision doesn't negatively impact anyone. If it could negatively impact someone, if either way making that decision could hurt someone or just, I don't know, make things difficult for them, that's where I'm willing to push deadlines. So like looking out for teammates, I think still becomes like number one, even when I'm making my own decisions.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'll check in with, I feel really natural now. I feel like we don't even make many decisions, perhaps because it's now naturalized into how we communicate, is that we somehow in my team, which there's 4 of us currently, which is very small, but through the constant conversation and communication, it kind of, we collectively get to a decision often without taking like any kind of vote or using a very explicit process, just because we've been practicing these approaches for so long. So I echo Susan, and I feel relief now. I feel relief when I actually do explicitly follow a process like advice process, and I know that I've got the intelligence and the opinion of those that know, and yeah, I feel relief often. So can resonate with many of the things coming up here, because 5 years ago, definitely it would be much more anxiety and confusion. And I just think like all of this, it just takes practice, and practice with hopefully similar people. So let's, with that, jump into things, because it's a very big topic. And I think, just so you know, we actually have a 4-week training on decision making. It's not a one-time, it's not a 2-hour topic. It's a 5-year topic. It's a lifetime topic. So this is going to be just jumping into the surface, and I know some other people in the mesh are doing things on this, and there's a lot of reading. So we will just be, as Susan says, that we may offer something potentially, if it works for the mesh and the OD team, a lot deeper on decision making, because it's super crucial, and it can, like, once you start to really build up those muscles, make things a lot easier. So perhaps we can start prototype it with this group in this session right now and just see what starts to come up. But to begin with, I'm jumping into things, and I said I'd make time for a few others, but no, let's do that at the end. Let's get into things. This is facilitation on the fly. So Susan, Lisa, and I will talk a bit about what we've seen and experienced. We're going to invite Brian in to ask you some questions. Some of the questions he was instigating in the call today that sound like great questions. So that will be super valuable. And then we'll break to do an exercise at 20 minutes before the hour. Lisa, do you want to kick us off with a bit of your understanding of like how really healthy decisions kind of work, and starting off at our nice higher level before we get down to those tools and processes we know people love so much?
Yeah, I think the nature of actually talking about and deciding, no pun intended, in a group how we make decisions and how we make different types of decisions is kind of a novel idea in itself. Like, not in a hierarchical organization, it's not very often that we do that. So in like a self-organizing team, that becomes really important, and it's like a key feature of a really effective group, is to agree, like, how do we make decisions, like what are the principles, and you know, what types of decisions require what types of, you know, practices or tools. And I think something I've learned is there are lots of different tools and methodologies, and Brian, it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about your thoughts, because I know some people shared those in the call earlier. So across the mesh, I know there are lots of different tools people are using, like all these different acronyms and advice process and what have you. But for me, I think sort of stripping that back and going back to the high level, there's something about the value of principles. And to give you an example, some of you might have heard of W.L. Gore, who have been self-organizing to some degree for a very long time, and they have this principle below the waterline, which effectively means that everyone at W.L. Gore consults with other associates, they call each other associates, before they take any actions that might be below the waterline. So if you think of a ship, if you make a hole in the ship above the waterline, then the ship isn't going to sink, and it's kind of okay, and people will maybe learn from that decision and they can reflect on it, and it's not going to hurt anyone, it's not going to sink the ship. But if you're going to make a decision that might make a hole below the waterline in a ship, then that's something that's worth consulting with more people on, because that's going to affect more people, and it's potentially, you know, higher stakes and higher risk. So a bit like we heard from Doug Kirkpatrick, I think really simple principles like that can help kind of guide our decision-making practices. So that's just sort of my 2 cents worth on decision making.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good principle, but below the waterline. And in the Decision 201 type training, we look into the Cynefin framework as well, which gives us another place to think about what kind of decisions are complex or chaotic. Well, in what environment are you making your decisions? Is it in complex, chaotic, obvious, or complicated? And each of those 4 parts of the Cynefin framework give you a little bit more insight into what kind of decision-making process might be valid for your particular scenario. We won't go into that now. I'll pass to Susan to talk about what she's seen a bit of around why she's so relieved now when it comes to decision-making.
Yeah, for me, it's absolutely, I want to say absolutely inextricably linked, but I found that working in teams and groups where roles are really clear, decision-making becomes much more fun and fluid and possible, right? So I think that it starts like at the very high level about, as a team, thinking about what kind of decisions are you making. I think that before you get into the, discussion or dialogue about how you want to make decisions, really think about what kind of decisions you're making. And if that is linked up with a really healthy role process, which could look like, I'm Susan and so let's just take this course, for example. So Kate's role is as lead curriculum designer. So her accountability is to ensure that The curriculum for this course is completed every week by Thursday, so that Lisa and I can review it, and it can be published for you by Friday. So decisions about the curriculum, Kate uses an advice process with Lisa and I to be able to kind of pull out and sense out what she's thinking. She's absolutely prepared to be challenged or reflect, but at the end of the day, Lisa and I both know that this is her gig, right? And we trust her enough to be able to look to us for advice, and for us to have that relief that, okay, Kate's got this. It's in her accountability as lead curriculum designer, to ensure that the experience that we all have on a Monday is this. It could be, for example, there's another decision around, maybe I hold part of my role accountability is deciding on how many streams of SO101 we run next time, depending on the number of interested people we have in the course. And I might use a integrated decision-making process around that, which would be, right, I propose that we have 3 cohorts, one in the Central European time zone, one in East Coast US, one in West Coast / Australia. Do people have questions about this? Is there a reaction to this? Or are there objections to this? Is this not safe enough to try? So this is just 2 examples of because we have role clarity and where the decision accountability lies, we can start to become more creative, thoughtful, and intentional about how we make decisions. But the key for me is knowing what our roles are, having accountabilities, the decision-making accountability for those roles clear, and having that be transparent.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that if any of us felt it, we would move it to consent and even consensus. If we really felt that we needed collective intelligence on it, and we could use like an integrated decision or a generative decision-making process, which is a variation of integrated. And with those 2 frameworks, consent or consensus, potentially as well. But that's sort of a feeling that we'd have. That's why I started this call with feeling as well. So we're going to pass to Brian now to take us through some questions that sounded very, very useful in the call you were in before. And we've got 11 minutes for this, Brian. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. So with 11 minutes, so quick summary, this afternoon we had a number of people who impromptu got on a facilitated call, and we broke into pairs for that call and answered the question, how does your team make decisions right now? What do you like about that process, and what do you think can be improved? And so with 11 minutes, I'm wondering if we want to try, Kate, try to go into pairs and come back, or would that be advisable? Or do we want a popcorn style, interview 1 or 2 volunteers here?
What do you think? What would be your sense of?
My sense at this point would be go more popcorn style rather than the issues of trying to break out into breakout rooms. So and if we have 11 minutes, then probably 10 now. Maybe we could do 2 5-minute interviews. Do we have any volunteers who didn't participate in this afternoon's discussion who'd be willing to be interviewed about your team and how you make decisions? I'm looking for hands for volunteers, at least 2. I've got one from Sarah Swathi. And anyone else? And Camilla, perfect. All right, thanks. Sarah, are you comfortable going first?
Sure. Can you drop the question in the chat so that I know if I'm missing any details?
Absolutely, or I can help you to facilitate. So I think the first question would be, how does your team make decisions right now, Sarah Swathi?
So I'm in the circles team. we make decisions. We created an organizational manifesto and make decisions using a voting bot where someone from the team will surface a proposal, and we like in our organizational manifesto we formed an understanding of what a quorum was and how many votes are required in order for something to be passed. And so once the proposal has circulated, depending on the needs and like kind of the nuances of the proposal, we have a weekly meeting called the parking lot where we discuss like open questions. And then we set a deadline for the vote. So once the proposal surfaces, we like take that time if we need it to kind of talk through different parts of what we think, and then we go to the bot.
Cool. And what are the things that are working well about that for your team so far?
It's cool to have a process. And it's great that, I mean, it's a relatively small team. It's 12 people. And it's great that everyone like has the option to participate, and it's great that it's also, you don't necessarily have to. So if people aren't engaging, like we can still, we still have managed to like push things through. That's what's good about it. And I mean, it's also nice to have a proposal process. The parking lot has been like a new social technology for us. That's been really handy. Just having space like that isn't super structured. It's basically our third space. It's like a space where we can come and have loose, like associative conversations instead of having it be like really hyper structured. And that has made us more conversational. And yeah, so I think that's been a big improvement.
Very interesting. And so when you say third space, what were the other ones that you're picturing, and how do you differ this third space?
Well, a third space is typically a physical space. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of virtual mapping, but so in physical space, there's like, gosh, what are the first two? There's the office, and then I'm trying to remember. There's the office, and then maybe there's like the conference room. And the third space is like a cafe or like something that's a little bit more loosely structured. So, I mean, if we still have our stand-ups, right? But stand-ups aren't the place to have open-ended questions and conversations. And we still have like really tactical meetings. But those are also like really, really goal-driven. And because of the time constraints, are also not necessarily ideal for kind of like getting into the nitty gritty of really big questions. So the parking lot is like we kind of like walk in and facilitate it relative to the needs of the moment. And it's like a lot more is allowed in terms of what you're bringing to the table and want to express and want to talk through. So I guess that would be the difference.
Awesome. Thank you. And then what are some of the challenges or some of the things that this process isn't quite mapping to or supporting right now for the team?
So I think it's a little too easy for people to drop off and not participate, which has been a common problem I've seen in like voting spaces, like notifications and keeping people engaged. Also, like maybe because of how long it takes to get consensus, even in a smallish group, I mean, maybe it's medium, I don't know. People try to like figure out ways to, like, people get impatient. People get impatient and kind of go around the process or go under the process or just ignore the process. And then like team members lose trust and get stung and end up like coming back around and being like, hey, what about the process? And we're like, well, it was slow. And so, yeah, those are some of the tensions so far.
No, that's brilliant. Is there anything else that I didn't cover that you'd want to share briefly before we move over to Camilla's sharing?
No, well, tons, but nothing in this short amount of time. Yeah.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Saraswati.
Mm-hmm.
Camilla, so can you tell us a little bit about your team's decision-making process today?
Sure. We are community. We're actually like a very big team. Right now we are at 24, I want to say. 24. So, and we are spread out throughout the globe, really. So the way that the decisions are made are regionally and vertically. Regionally, you know, we have a Europe region, and we have MENA region, and we have Africa, we have Canada, and then North America and Latin America. So the decisions are made regionally. And then vertically is when there are common interests aligned and common projects aligned. So that's like, so if you're a task force for a specific project, then you make decisions together. That's how we make decisions.
What types of decisions sort of come up in your circles, work, Camilla?
So many, because we do so many different things, from servicing spokes to servicing the mesh to servicing external clients. We do a lot of things, so the kind of decisions are made are like, they vary from agreeing on specific location and a specific venue, to how we're going to handle the registration, what tools we're going to use, and you know, when do we involve the other teams in order to make sure that the event and project is successful. So we kind of touch on a little bit of everything. And again, like if there is an event in my region, for example, right now it's East Coast, and we're focusing on Alethio's launch product. So if I take on that project, I have teammates that I work with, and we make decisions together. And then everyone is assigned a certain number of tasks, and they are responsible for executing all of that. And right now, everything is looking good. Does that answer your question?
It did, thank you. And so what are the things that you think are going well in your current methods as a team?
I think that it's a great idea that decisions are made regionally, because I'm here in this region. But like, I have no idea, like, what works for this region doesn't transfer into other regions, because the market is different and target audience is different. So, and it totally makes sense that those who are experts in specific regions make those decisions. And vertically as well, like those who are experts in a specific niche, who can ensure the success of a project or an event, should make those decisions.
Perfect. And from your vantage, Camilla, what are some of the things that you think there's opportunities for improvement, or things that don't quite fit with the current practices too well that come up every once in a while?
Let me think about this. So I think that lack of visibility into what kinds of decisions are being made in other regions and how they're being made. So just lack of visibility into other spaces. That's kind of a problem, because then it's difficult to speak for the team and represent the team well. Which then causes misalignment due to lack of communication. But then again, it's because we're growing so quickly, and we are like working on multiple projects at once all the time. So I'm not sure what the solution is for that.
Perfect. And then we've got about 2 minutes here. And so in the interest of getting participation from others, is there anyone who wants to ask either Saraswathi or Camilla a quick follow-on question?
Sorry if I missed it. Thanks, Brian. Sorry if I missed it, Saraswati, but is there a place that you're logging Any decisions, like what channel or tool are you using to log decisions as they're made? Is it anywhere in particular, or just in Slack or in Google Docs?
I can say that my team uses Rocket Chat for most internal communication. We were using WhatsApp for a while, but that was voted out, kind of. Actually, that was more of a coup. And then that's also where like the voting bot was programmed. So it's in Rocket Chat that we all vote.
Just quickly, does that have like a decision making part of it, like a voting aspect, Rocket Chat?
Built in, you mean? Like, is that a feature of Rocket Chat?
Yeah.
Not that I know of. Actually, one of a developer on the team programmed a bot.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
I had a question for Camilla. So the regional versus horizontal, like, are those static groups? Or like, is there like sometimes blend or crossover? Is it like a fluid construct or?
I actually, hold on, Saraswati, I missed the first part. Can you repeat? And whoever is dialing in, can you please mute? Thank you. Okay, can you mute in? I think you're muted.
You regional and horizontal decision making. I hope that I'm correct in.
Yeah, regional and vertical.
Vertical.
One of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm just curious if like those are discrete or if there's fluidity among those teams. Like sometimes you'll have a decision maker in the regional. It's not like a static set of people, or is it a static set of people?
So for regional, it is. Because on the East Coast, like you have only a certain number of people who live in the East Coast. On the West Coast, you have a handful of people who are working in that region. But it is fluid when it comes to making decisions vertically, because when you're working on certain projects, or if your expertise comes in to play, then you're part of that task force for a specific project or an event or whatever that entails. And then you make decisions together, whether you are in this part of the world or that part of the world. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you both of you for sharing and being subjects in this interview. I appreciate it. And Kate, thanks for throwing this into the agenda today.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was really great and great questions. So, to your friend, your colleague Eric, and great facilitation.
Okay, can I just ask one question? Why did that come up? I mean, just asking, why did you do that session, Brian, or how did that all? What's the history behind why we're talking about that? That's all. I'm just wondering what the context is.
Yeah, I heard about uports and Pegasus's decision-making methods. So I got Daniel, and I'm so sorry, I'm drawing a blank because it was several weeks back now, and we just had an impromptu chat, and then at the end of the chat, we were like, we should see what other teams are doing, and so I put a little message into the members channel, and 30 people said they were going to show up. We had about 25, and it dropped down to 20 that went the full call and full participation.
Wow, this is a beautiful example of emergent prototyping, and this is what we want to see more and more of in this group. And yeah, this is how we take the learnings and the subjects out to the mesh. So that's great. I'll pass to Lisa, and we've got 16 minutes. We'll go late into our interview now, Lisa.
Yeah, so we have another fun liberating structures activity. So I'll share my screen to give you some instructions. Where is it? Here we go. So can everyone see my screen? Let's present. So this is a liberating structure called Troika Consulting. And the idea is to sort of use the wisdom of crowds or the wisdom of groups to bring wisdom to a problem or a challenge or something. So in your groups, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms And I want you to choose really quickly someone who's going to be the client who's going to present a challenge about decision making. So it doesn't have to be anything complicated, or just bring something like, oh, whenever we make decisions, this always happens. And so you have 2 minutes to talk about it. And then everyone else who isn't the client, you are going to be consultants. So you're going to ask clarifying questions. So this is not offering advice. This is not going into solution mode. It's just asking clarifying questions so that you understand the challenge. And then this is the fun part. So the client, when you do this face-to-face, then turns your back. But I think it'd be fun if you still do that, if you turn your back, if you can, to your computer screen, but still, so you can still hear the audio, because you get like a different richness of listening when you can't sort of see people and people can't read your face or your kind of reaction to things. And then the consultants will discuss your challenge and offer advice and recommendations. They'll talk with each other about your problem, and you can take some notes. And then the final stage is to spend a couple of minutes just giving feedback to your consultants. What did you take away? What was interesting for you? So I'm going to put the link to this slide in the chat, because I think when you go into breakout rooms, you'll lose it. And then you can go off into your rooms, and I'll give you about 15 minutes. So it'll be pretty fast. So choose really quickly who's going to be the client and get going. Let me just put this in the chat then. Ugh. How do I get my chat back?
Yeah, I think if we go till about 3 or 4 past,
yeah,
it's going to be tough, but we'll see what happens.
There's the slide there. Okay, so there's a group of 4, and everyone else is in groups of 3.
Okay, rush through. Sorry.
Responding, but I find that the people that are doing the consultants are freer because they're not reacting to the facial expressions or the body expressions of the person they're consulting. That's the genius move in this, I think.
Oh, okay. So welcome back. We won't be able to dig into all of your insights just now because we have our guest with us, Alana Irving. If you've got your video off and you can turn it back on just to say hi and show your face, that would be highly appreciated. Great. Oh, we want to see your face as well, Thomas and Edson. And I know, Travis, your connection's not. Oh, just for a minute. And Susan's driving, so we don't want to get her to crash, or we'll just leave you there. So yeah, we've got Alana with us, and I'll just ask you to introduce yourself by telling us a bit about how you became, your background and how you became involved so closely in this whole world of decision making, Alana.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I'm Alana, and I'm originally from California and now live in New Zealand. And I've worked with Kate and Susan and other people around Inspiral for quite a few years, lots of different projects. I guess I got interested in decision making. My mom loves to tell this story about when I was like 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten. I tried to explain democratic voting to the other kids to decide what to play, and they were just like so confused, and they started crying, and then I started crying, and it just wasn't gonna work out that day. But I think I've had this intense kind of interest in fairness and hearing from everyone, and also I think I had some tendencies to want to be the boss of things. And so by channeling that energy into facilitating equitable decision making, I think that kind of helped me short circuit that tendency. When I was in university, I lived in a housing cooperative where we made all decisions by consensus. And I found it to be a really transformative experience. Not just we all made decisions together, but we used formal consensus processes and learned a lot about facilitation and a lot about understanding people who think differently, and how to actually come to agreement on things. And then, of course, all of that kind of came into play when I came into Inspiral, and it was this I came in quite early, and there was, I think it was just at the time when it was ready for more formalized or more explicit decision-making processes. And that's around the time when we started making Lumia, which is a decision-making software tool, which I guess we'll talk a bit about. But just that was like the experimental playground. And I got even more interested in different kinds of decision-making and how they work in a collaborative network.
Great, thank you. So everyone, I'm going to read through various questions, but if there's something that's really speaking to you and you want to go further, don't hesitate to raise your hand and we'll go down that rabbit hole. And the floor is open. But Alana, so just going back to that first experience you had with consensus, and then the kind of the principle that, you know, participatory decision making kind of operates on, which is more consent. I find that still super confusing. Can you shed some light on the difference and yeah, where either might be more useful?
Yeah, it's so like frustrating that the terminology around this stuff has become so confused because yeah, obviously the way that we use some of these words in everyday language is a little bit different to their like formal definitions and decision making sometimes, but I find it's one of those things that really trips people up a lot, and I think it's a real shame. So I'm kind of like on the fence of like, do I be one of those like curmudgeonly people like, no, you're using the word wrong, you have to use it this other way, or do we just kind of go with it and like adopt different terminology because people's understanding is changing? Personally, like I'm still on the fence between those. But like I think people use consensus, but say consensus when they really mean unanimity, meaning like everybody agrees that this is what they all want. Whereas I think consensus isn't like a formal consensus process is almost opposite of that. It's like you don't disagree unless there's some extremely like overwhelming and important reason to block something. So it's a combination of a culture of not blocking unless it's super, super important. Plus, if somebody is raising concerns, it's kind of like you always have the idea in your head, well, they could block. So that means we actually all have to put in the effort to truly understand where each other is coming from. And if somebody has a concern, everybody in the group is sort of motivated to swarm on that concern and understand it and resolve it, or maybe integrate it in with the proposal. So a formal consensus process means somebody puts forward a proposal, and if there's no blocks, it goes ahead. And oftentimes what that means is somebody puts forward a proposal and then there's a discussion and people do all get on the same page. But when it kind of like comes down to it and people don't all have the same favorite idea that they agree with, it's a practice of trusting other people in the group to go ahead with the way they think they should do it if you don't have a strong objection. And it's also a practice of occasionally when somebody does want to block or when there's a serious concern, like truly committing to staying with the discussion and staying with the people in your group until you can bring everybody along with you, at least to the point of saying, okay, I can live with it at the least. If not, they love it.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions on that or need any further clarification? Okay. Great. Well, there's a test at the end. No.
Oh, Thomas was saying something.
Thomas?
I'm still confused.
Sure.
And I know that I was listening to my thoughts in my head, but I'm really interested, but it's just got confused. I'm still confused about the difference between consensus and unanimity.
Okay. Sure. Like being unanimous means everybody agrees, right?
Yeah.
And so that means agree as in like, you know, that's actually the option that they want to choose. Whereas consensus, I think, comes from the root of consent. So consent being not necessarily that it's your favorite thing in the world, but you can live with it, you can agree with it, you can let it go ahead, even if you're not, you know, jumping up and down with excitement about it. So I think like it's sort of a practice where you're constantly challenged to inquire within yourself, well, maybe this isn't the idea I would have had, or this isn't, you know, my favorite solution, but can I consent in the interest of allowing the group to go forward? And I just think, yeah, I think maybe we should adopt new terminology because it is so confusing, because we do use consensus in everyday language to mean everybody agrees and everybody's come to think the same way. So some people have started calling what used to be called consensus decision-making consent-based decision-making, so that it reminds you of this consent idea first and foremost. And I would say like, if you're with, if you're with people who come from sort of maybe a community decision-making background, and they come from a tradition of consensus decision-making, they're going to call it that. But if you're with people who are maybe new to these ideas, and it's easier for them if you call it consent-based decision-making or come up with a new word, I think, I'm a pragmatist, do whatever works. I think a theme in this discussion will probably be along the lines of, it's important to have explicit conversations about decision-making and what protocols we're using and what that actually means, so that everybody understands. And so that can totally be part of this conversation. Like, let's use consensus. Okay, what can we just clarify? Do you mean we all have to agree on everything? Or do you mean we're gonna let things go ahead unless you have a really strong objection?
No, thank you very much. Yeah, it's definitely sunk in now.
Yeah, super clear. Thanks, Alana. Clear for me, at least. And maybe that's a good practice that we can start using in this group. Unanimous or consent-based. Because, I mean, using consensus is already getting crazy. So, Alana, can you tell us about some of the behaviors, processes, and tools that you think are necessary or are good to consider for a really healthy decision-making culture? What have you seen in your time?
I think decision-making is an interesting one. Like recently, an organization asked me to come do some consulting with them, and the people were basically like, I was like, so what's the issue? And they immediately started talking about some of the deepest, most complex kind of things you can deal with organizational culture and structure. And I was like, okay, that sounds huge. Can we take a stab at this through a lens? And I did suggest decision making, because I think actually the lens of decision making can be a window into some of these truly deep questions. So for example, I think a healthy decision making culture comes from just a healthy overall culture, and things like communication, which it's so broad, and it to be almost overly general and not useful thing to say, yeah, of course we should have good communication. What does that mean? But if you want to have good decision making, I think that's just the core of can people get across to each other what they think, or even one step deeper than that, do people know inside themselves what they think and what's truly important to them and what their negotiables and non-negotiables are, because these things are front and center with decision making. So I think all the different things you're going to learn in this course relate back to decision making in some ways. But I would say, yeah, important things for decision making is that clarity. Can we talk about how we make decisions? I think that a red flag, if a group can't talk openly about how decisions are made, it often means there's some kind of weird hidden power structure going on. People can make decisions all they want, but that's not actually what's going to happen, because the real power is somewhere else, or there's not enough alignment or relationship with each other to even sort of have that conversation, and there isn't enough coherence to have that how do we want to work together, how do we want to make decisions conversation. So that's also a massive red flag. When I find that on the flip side, if a group does have some coherence and has sort of claimed their own power, having explicit decision-making conversations is an awesome way to open up really important questions and have a lot of the discussions you need to have to grow your culture. So I felt like that was really general. I hope it was useful.
Oh, that's good. Let's go wide before we go narrow. And we've got a question from Brian.
Yeah, I've been often really curious about formalized decision-making methods versus sort of organic, emergent, loose ones. People talk about big decisions, small decisions in teams when they're often trying to classify between these two. Just with your experience, what are your thoughts on these ends of the scale, so to speak?
Yeah, I think you're pointing out a really important question, and it's really tricky and never, I would say, black and white to know, okay, well, what's one of those things I'm just supposed to go ahead on, or we as a small crew are just supposed to go ahead on, and what's one of those things we actually need to run a formal process in or bring to the bigger group. I think that's one of the important collective skills a team can work on together. And honestly, you kind of learn through trial and error sometimes, because you kind of have to try something and later find out, oh crap, other people wanted to be asked about that. Next time I'll know. Or you can spend a bunch of time and then realize, well, we could have just it was experimental anyway, we should have just tried something. So it can be challenging. I'd say it's maybe more about Yeah, I don't know if there's any sort of leading indicators. You can look at maybe some lagging indicators, like do people feel good about how power flows in this group? If there are serious problems with power dynamics, a lot of times that will trace back to those calls about decision making. For like, are we gonna make a call behind the three of us behind this closed door, or are we gonna bring this to the whole group? A lot of times, like, power issues stem from moments like that. And other things like just like the most basic, like, do we have velocity? Are we like shipping? Are we delivering things? Are we going too slow? If that's an issue, a lot of times the opposite can be true, where it's like, we're totally checking with too many people, or we're designing by committee, or people don't feel empowered to just go ahead in their area of expertise or their sphere of influence. So yeah, it's a little bit difficult because, like I said, those are totally lagging indicators. Like, you can't really assess those things until a little bit down the road when you've had experience together. But it's one of those things that you just have to constantly be inquiring and tuning and growing skills around as a group.
Yeah, great question. So just on that, Alana, and with teams or organizations who are trying to transition away from command and control or hierarchical structures towards self-management, what have you noticed about that? And you've brought something up, and something I've noticed is often we default to trying to get input on every single decision, and deciding about how we decide can take a few hours. And I'm wondering if you have any pointers specifically around this big tension that I think a lot of people have, which is, it's just so slow.
Yeah, I think it's really healthy and important for groups to have explicit conversations about how they want to make decisions together. A lot of groups just kind of like don't talk about it out loud, and then they just fall into some habits, or maybe there's some people who have strong preferences and other people just kind of go with what they want, but they never people don't step back and ask, well, what kind of decision making do we want in what kind of context? I think it's important to remember that there are heaps of different decision making protocols, and you can learn about them, and you can think and talk about when might we want to use different ones. There is no one answer. There's never one right decision-making protocol for everyone all the time. It's definitely highly context dependent. And I think really skillful self-management groups will have sort of like a tool belt full of decision-making skills and protocols that they can bring out when they need to. So yeah, I'd say like not talking about it is something that I've noticed happen sometimes. I think talking about it and saying, okay, this is our decision-making process, but that having a big gap between that and how things actually happen can be a big challenge that people face. And that's not always because people are like evil, power-grabbing, elite people making decisions behind closed doors. A lot of times it's much more mundane. It's more like, people just, want to move quickly, or they don't know how to facilitate a wider decision, or we haven't actually put process in place. And then it's like power runs like water runs downhill. It follows some of the paths of least resistance. And then before you know it, it's pooling over here and pooling over there. So I think some people like have a resistance to, I don't want a really heavy formal decision-making process. But I guess keep in mind, sometimes things which are short-term investments of time or feel a bit heavy, long-term can save heaps of time. So if you find yourself renegotiating your decision-making protocols every time a decision comes up, that's hugely time-consuming. Whereas if you invest some time up front to agree some decision-making protocols ahead of time, and then everybody knows, okay, this is what we're going to use in these different situations. And one of the coolest things about implementing explicit decision-making protocols is then you have a built-in way of changing your decision-making protocol. Because one of the problems people get into at the beginning is this like bootstrapping of like, well, how do we decide how we decide at the very beginning? And I think the answer to that is, it doesn't matter. You're never going to pick the right thing first. You just have to pick something so that you have a framework to have the conversation about how you're going to change and improve it. And if you can do that, and you can just have that culture of, we're going to keep talking about how this is working, and we're going to keep iteratively improving, it'll be okay. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on this particular point? Because I just wanted to ask you if we can make it explicit. Why are we bothering? to get the input of the collective? You know, is it just because that's a fairer way to do it, or are there other benefits as well, Alana?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it's also something that speaks to your last question about sometimes pitfalls people might fall in. Sometimes you don't want to do collective decision making. Sometimes it's actually okay to decide you want to put somebody in charge of something. And there are really good reasons to do that. Maybe they're an expert, maybe other people are busy with other things. And that can be a profound act of trust to actually cede some power in what can feel like a hierarchical way. But I think if the hierarchy is ultimately still based on the consent of the people who are participating, it's not coercive, it's not a bad thing. People can self-organize into hierarchies too. People can self-organize into empowering people with individual decision-making power. And so yeah, I think one answer to that question is it's not always the right call. But oftentimes, collective decision-making is an amazing way to access collective intelligence, to help people feel engaged in this group that they're working with, to help, really bring their best selves and fully have co-ownership over outcomes and what you're doing together. And really, using the expertise of different people in the room. I mean, those are all that's the goal, right? You want to bring all of that stuff. And so collective decision-making is an amazing point where that can happen, especially because oftentimes it's an area where you will roll out a little bit of a structured process, or you will name a facilitator, or things some acts like that, which tend to bring out a bunch more collective potential in a group.
Yeah, totally. And I can relate to this a lot. Earlier in the year, I didn't use a collective decision-making process, and I should have used it vice process. And I was so attached to what I wanted to happen, and I wanted to keep it really close so I could control it. And then several months into this project, I was like, no, I really needed my colleague to be with me on this, but I totally purposely surpassed her and hadn't used the advice process. And she was like, nope, yeah. And I learned my lesson the hard way.
I think there's there's something there about speed as well. I think sometimes people think that engaging in a collective decision-making process is slow, and it totally can be slow. But the flip side to that is, once you make the decision and everybody's on the same page and everybody understands why the decision is made and everybody is behind it, the speed that you can take collective action after that point is incredible. And contrast that to what happens when people make a decision and then they have to run some sort of change management process or get buy-in or whatever, and that is slow. So remembering that speed to making a decision is not the same as speed to actually successfully implementing something.
Absolutely. I think that is a crucial point that we can bring to the naysayers, and I've seen that many times. If any questions are coming up on any of these topics, or any challenges or opportunities you're seeing in your teams, let me know, and we can really dive into them. We've got a bunch of time. Lisa, if you've got any questions coming forward, please bring them in. Otherwise, I'll just keep going through my list.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, obviously, I'm a total nerd about decision making, so of course I want to hear about all of your experiences and questions and what's going on for you and your teams and stuff, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Cool. So maybe just if you are facing a challenge in your team, or on a particular process or a decision, or not having a clear way to make decisions, just let's bring it forward and use the collective intelligence. Josh, great. What do you got?
Yeah, so I'll just talk to the challenge that I brought up during the exercise earlier. So my team is about 12 people, and we have no explicit decision-making process. It's very informal. We just have discussions, and there's usually something kind of just we come to consensus in our discussion. But I'm realizing from our team members' input that people are feeling left out. More quiet people, introverted people won't speak up during the meetings, and then their voices just aren't heard. They won't raise objections to any decisions that we make. So we're trying to remedy that, and we don't have an explicit decision-making process to like review this. So I guess it's kind of the bootstrapping problem, but also it works really well. I like the informal process because it just feels like organic and we come to consent, but then there's people that it's not working for. So I want to make it work for everybody.
Yeah, that's a super common situation. I think I've experienced that heaps. I think a lot of teams have, and I think it's important. Yeah, it's important that you're noticing that. That's like an amazing first step. There are many groups where people just never notice that the quiet people aren't being heard from. So awesome step. Awareness is the first step, definitely. I think that a lot of people understand the importance of diversity on a team and like different experiences, different backgrounds, different perspectives to actually coming up with the best solutions, or being able to use all the expertise of these people you've probably gone to a lot of trouble to get on your team. And I think diversity of people and thought can best be brought out by diversity of communication. Essentially, people communicate in different ways. If you're only using one mode of communication, for example, large group synchronous discussion, there will be some people who have that as their preference and they will naturally communicate a lot in that format, whereas other people won't. Whereas if you're using, say, asynchronous written communication or interpretive dance or drawing or any other kinds of different approaches, one-on-one conversations, individual written reflection, which you then share, all these kinds of things which come from a facilitation tool belt, what you'll see is each different way that you communicate brings out different strengths from different people, and you'll get answers from different people, and you'll have a different conversation. So again, I think there's no right way, but I think one thing that you can do is just experiment with different forms of communication and see what happens and see what tends to work. And I think that's also an interesting starting place, because you don't have to jump to the difficult conversation of like, who's really in charge here and that sort of stuff. It's actually just, well, let's talk to each other more and bring out more voices. So I'd say using tools like Lumio, for example, that's asynchronous written communication. And one thing that I see heaps in Lumio is there'll be an open discussion, you'll hear from some people, and then a proposal will be raised, which is like a very specific course of action where people can express if they agree or not. And then you'll just have a whole bunch of people come out of the woodwork, just because the difference between open asynchronous written discussion and like directed convergent asynchronous written discussion is enough to bring out not only different people and also different modes of thinking in the same people. So I tried different communication styles.
Cool, thanks. Samantha, I was wanting to bring you in here. You look like you're driving.
I'm not. I'm heading to a different location because I could barely hear in the office.
Oh, wow. There you go.
But I am in a car, yes.
Okay. Do you want to bring in the thing you brought up in the second around you not feeling like you're being included in a lot of the decision makings, and you're assuming what you're going to be told what to do by the old man? Is what you've told me. Oh, we can't hear you, Sam.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Look at your forehead. Go ahead.
I think that so for me personally, I'm one of the youngest people on my team, but I'm one of the people who's been at the company the longest. So I have a institutional knowledge and skill set that's very different skill set from some of my colleagues who are, 40s, 50s, a little bit older. And a lot of times, because I just assume that I'm going to be told what to do, because a lot of times just because of my age or having a different background, I don't get the option to be heard, and they don't always ask for my input, even though a lot of times I end up having already covered my bases and having the answer or direction that I know could be helpful, but they just, until somebody who's older or a different gender says it, they won't always listen to me. So, and we're supposed to be decentralized and flat, but it's, we're dealing with monarchy and a benevolent dictator. So yeah, I don't know how to surface that or have that kind of conversation and actually be heard.
Yeah, wow. I mean, you're speaking to some like deep dynamics throughout our whole society. And I think looking at the microcosm of a team and the lens of decision making helps highlight some of those, which is very interesting. I don't know. I mean, you could say you have a problem with decision making, but it sounds like you actually have a problem with power. And when we talk about this explicit, implicit thing, like, yeah, sometimes it's nice if you can just like all implicitly like, you know, move around each other and know what to do and never say anything out loud. But the truth is that implicit structures will always privilege those who inherently have more privileges coming in or who have more power, whether it's seniority or personality or gender or whatever. If you don't make things explicit, you're definitely setting yourself up to have unbalanced power dynamics. So sometimes it can be possible to come in and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had explicit decision-making protocols? And that can be a side way into this issue without saying, yo, dudes, you're like not ceding any power. I think it could be a way in. I also think like it's socially dangerous if you are not in a position of power to question power. I think one red flag that I look for in teams and in my own work is if you have to leverage personal social capital to get things done instead of participating in a process which is equally available to everyone, I would say you have an issue with power in your group. So for example, if you had to come out and leverage the like, I don't even know, like get upset or threat, you know, say this, why am I even working here? Or make somebody feel guilty or like call in a personal favor. If you have to do that to question power, you have a real issue with power in your group. So I don't know, like I've been doing these interviews across the mesh, which I have been finding fascinating and hearing about how different people's teams work. And in some of them, they have some structures set up where somebody could bring up that kind of feedback, but it sounds like in a lot of teams, it's not necessarily there and it is socially dangerous. And it should not be on the people with less power to solve this problem for the people with more power. Essentially, people with power in groups have a responsibility. If they care about equitable collaboration and they don't want it to be a hierarchy, people with power have to notice that they have it and do the work to distribute it, because you cannot, it's very, the position you're in is very difficult, and I don't think it should be on you to solve, but to be honest, like other people might not even notice it. So maybe it's a bigger conversation across the mesh, like when people are stuck in these situations, what are they supposed to do?
Yep. Samantha, do you want to comment?
No, I think that's spot on. I think that or at least, you know, it's an awkward situation, and I don't think that the people who are in positions of power even, you know, might know how to hold themselves accountable for dealing with it and make the, I don't know, as you said, the responsibility for collaboration much more equitable. That would be awesome to see. I just don't know if these people can always see. I don't know how to eloquently put it. Pass.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, like for example, like noticing that you have power and doing the work to distribute it, that's what leadership looks like in a truly flat environment. If leadership is looking like takes charge, tells everybody what to do, that is a completely different paradigm. That's a different way of thinking. If you really want equitable collaboration, leadership looks like distributing power, not consolidating it. So that's a much bigger conversation, I reckon.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha, and thanks, Alana. And
So,
I totally
sorry.
agree. Are you sorry?
Sorry, I just want to, can I just bring in something there quickly, Kate? I've just pulled off the road because this is so fascinating for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Alana, I think that you were just surfacing the one of the paradoxes, one of the sides of the continuum of not actually acknowledging power being expressed as coercion and and telling and controlling. The other side that I see a lot, especially in teams that are trying to be self-organizing, is this weird passive-aggressive passivity and doing nothing, and somehow expecting that by not actually naming things, that's an expression of power and proof that the team or the group is not mature enough to do what obviously they should be able to do, because the leader is just completely abdicating in a way that is equally dangerous as telling.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of nods.
I think we're probably familiar with stories in the world about how you take power from somebody who doesn't want to give it up, and they're usually not nice, polite stories. Like, if somebody has power and wants to distribute it, that can be like a beautiful transition. But if somebody wants to hang on to it and they've really got it, then your choices are kind of like subversion, just live with it, or have a revolution. Right?
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I agree that those are like entirely different. Well, I think that those are different ends of the spectrum, having a lot of power and not wanting to give any of it up, and wanting, if you're a leader in this new way of working, wanting to distribute power. But I also think that we do have some power, even if we are not accruing lots of social capital and we're from different genders and ethnicities. Like, we have the ability to bring in practices, micro practices, some tools, and to change the culture from the bottom up. And let's remember, I'm not trying to excuse anyone, but this coming from hierarchy, as many of the people in the mesh and consensus have done, does mean that everyone's having to a lot of people are having to unlearn some behaviors that we have been learning since we went to school. So we're all in this together, and of course, like, if you've got some extreme behaviors of holding close and manipulation and really negative things, that's when the revolution may be necessary, but also we can do a lot. But I'm wondering if sorry, Elena?
I think you're totally right, and I think that situation that Samantha's talking about, like, that's real, and we need to listen to that. And I think I much more commonly see the situation where a group of people genuinely wants to collaborate well together on an equitable basis, and it's still really hard, and it's still this whole skill set that we have to learn, and a bunch of processes and stuff that we have to develop. And just, I think I was kind of getting at what Susan was saying, is just the desire to share power is not enough. You have to have a proactive collective project of making it real, and that's a whole other level.
Yeah, totally. And also practicing all of the inner work to make that, to learn how to really collaborate, which is not just easily said and done. I'm wanting to dig into any other questions that have come up. We do want to make time to just talk about Lumio, and even maybe we can look at it, but maybe that's too much to ask. But has Sam's question brought up anything for anyone else, now that we're right down in the thick of things here? Yeah, Camilla, go ahead.
I agree with the point that not having like explicit structure, or having like explicit structure for decision making, or having not having those set up and not having that remain explicitly, there is a danger to that, because you can't point to anything when everything is implicit. That poses actually quite a good amount of threat to me. That's all.
Cool. Thanks, Camilla. Good processing. It's valuable. Does anyone else have any things they want to bring in? Any things unrelated, but challenges you're having in your team around decision making or power, or when to use what process? We can go right back to structure if we need. Brian.
I mean, we've had some dialogue recently as a team, and there was a subtext in the room that I've been sitting with, and I don't know, I might be perceiving it incorrectly because it wasn't like something that was explicitly said, but as a team was dialoguing about decision making, a lot of the questions that were coming up, because we were doing something, or we were dialoguing about doing something that was very different than how they'd worked in the past, as many had come from traditional hierarchical organizations, and we were trying to bring forward sort of setting some new agreements as a team as to how we're going to approach our roles, our work, our, the social commitments, all these things that we've been dialoguing about here. And the thing that was underneath, and I'm trying to get into, was just this. There was literally at one point, to make it something more explicit, somebody said something like, "This just sounds too good to be true." And I could see in this new team, as it was forming, a lot of doubt, and it made me fearful that only a little bit of that doubt was coming to the surface. Anyone have any thoughts on how to overcome all of these learned behaviors that we have to unlearn, both as people who come in with leadership and power, and those who come in perhaps maybe not with it in these implicit systems as we're trying to make them explicit? Sorry if I phrased that in a crummy way, but it was a very ill-formed thought still for me.
Do you want to take this, Alana?
Yeah, sure. I'm also interested to hear from others, because I'm have a feeling that a lot of us have probably had similar experiences or have similar questions. But yeah, what you're saying of this, like, it feels too good to be true. I mean, to me, that just speaks to, like, I think in our hearts, like, we know what makes a human being feel safe and like they belong and like they're heard, and what it means to trust each other, and what it feels like to feel in true community. And that's sort of like, I do believe that we were sort of evolved to seek that sense of community and to bond with the people that we're working with every day. And we live in a culture of alienation from that, I'll be honest. Patriarchy and capitalism, and like, we grow up, a lot of families are dictatorships, and then you go to school and that's a dictatorship, and then you go to work and that's a dictatorship. Like, when were we supposed to practice these skills? When were we supposed to get in touch with this part of ourselves and grow it? I have much empathy for everyone in this space, because we are doing something truly radical when we try to work together this way, when we treat each other as equal human peers. So that is the journey. And I'd say never get down on yourself for struggling or having these questions, because it's what we're all going through. And that too good to be true feeling, like, hold on to that, grab it and hold on to that together. And that's what gets you through when you're having the most frustrating meeting of your life and you can't agree. Like, I remember when I lived in a housing co-op, we had like a 6-hour meeting about where we were getting free range eggs or cage free eggs, and I was like gonna shoot myself in the head. But it's in those moments when you're like really about to lose it, it's that feeling, it's that knowledge of, okay, but on a deeper level, if we truly listen to each other and use this as an opportunity to trust each other, understand each other, like, that actually matters. So I think that those questions are super important. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an easy answer, but like, I feel you.
Lisa, do you want to bring something in here?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. How can we always make sure that people are bringing things to the surface? And there's a little practice that we do. Oh God, sorry, my neighbor's playing weird music. Yeah, there's a practice that we do in my team at Tough Leadership Training, where we start every meeting with the question, any moose heads? And moose heads are like a metaphor for something that is taboo in a team, like something that we don't talk about, something it's as if there's like a moose head on the table in between us as we're having a discussion, and we're not talking about it, but it's there and it's rotting, and there's blood on the table, there's flies buzzing around, and we're trying to like collaborate and stuff around this moose head. So we start all meetings with this question, any moose heads? we've been doing it for years. I mean, the company's been going for 15 years, and this is a kind of embedded practice, but it still takes courage as human beings. I think we're wired not to say things like that, but it helps to have this practice for people to say, yeah, well, actually, I have a small moose head. It's just something about what came up in the last meeting about this, and I've been feeling a bit, and it just helps kind of get it up on the table so we can name it, and then we can sort of do something with it. So that's like a little practice that I really like.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I can't wait to use that on Thursday in my next team meeting. Alana, can we talk about Lumio? What does it enable? We talked a bit about how it's great for, asynchronous communication, and it is great for decision making, but I think it offers a lot more. Can you just give us a little pitch or explanation?
Yeah, sure. Well, Lumio we started building it in 2011 when some people from Inspiro, which was part of it, was very early days in Inspiro, and we were just starting to scale. And some people from Occupy Wall Street movement, who are like part of Occupy Wellington here in New Zealand, we sort of like crossed each other's paths and realized that we had the same problem, which was we wanted to include everybody in decision making, but it's impossible to get everybody to the meetings. People have reasons that they can't be there. It's impossible to have enough time to hear from everyone because everybody has to talk one by one if you're sitting in a big circle listening to everyone. And also like certain voices can really tend to dominate in that situation. So this question of how can we scale collaborative decision making, and how do we use the online space to do this in a way which is, it's not just like majority rules voting or a poll or whatever existed at the time. So we made Lumio. Basically, it's not a complicated piece of software. It's like a threaded discussion system where you can post topics and put comments on those topics. But the thing that's different about it is this proposal function. So there's a part of it which is divergent, so an open discussion, asking what people think, gathering information, having a wide-ranging discussion if you need to on this topic, and then a proposal. You can start a proposal and it like comes up next to the discussion, and it's a clear course of action. The proposal itself has a time limit that that invitation to participate is X amount of time, days, or however long you want it. And that triggers a convergent phase of the discussion, which means come together and like, okay, but what are we actually going to do? Do we agree? And it visually just reveals, well, how does everybody feel about this proposal? Some of the cool things about Lumio that might distinguish it from other systems are Lumio is built for constructive deliberation, which essentially shows up in the software as you can change your mind. The idea is by listening to other people or continuing the discussion, you might actually change what you think. So you can go back and change your position on a proposal. And a lot of times you'll see the group collective intelligence kind of evolve as the discussion continues. It was originally built with consent-based decision-making in mind. So it has functions like block, so for example, or disagree. And what you see a lot of times is a proposal will go up, somebody might disagree, and then the conversation moves in that direction, sort of deal with that concern, and then maybe that proposal could fail, and then a new proposal can happen, which is an iterative improvement, or perhaps that person's concern is assuaged and they change their mind to agree.
I'm just going to share my screen, Alana,
okay,
as you talk, even though it might not be explicitly relevant. Okay.
Oh yeah, awesome. No, it's always with software. It's always easier if you can actually see what it looks like. And then since then, Lumio has also evolved to include other decision types. So it started with this consent-based decision format, but now there's other things like, for example, like doodle style, like let's find a time to do the thing type of decision. There's like a check-in, like click this check when you've read the document or done the thing or whatever. Basically, lots of different ways that groups need to come to convergence or have a clear thing done within a time limit. So essentially, like we were a bunch of kind of activists and facilitators who wanted to bring what we knew about how to have a really constructive conversation and clear conversation and make decisions together to the online space. One of the most important things I think about Lumio is it automatically gives you an archive of all of your decisions, and you can go back and say, oh, well, who participated in this decision? What did we decide? Why did we decide that? And if things change, you can go back and, you know, reopen that conversation and be like, oh, well, this fact that was really important to this decision has now changed, so let's talk about this again and make a new decision. Oh yeah, it also has things like polls and dot voting, and these are like different facilitation tools, I would say, that you could bring into a discussion to see what people in the group think. And that speaks again to what we were talking about before about different communication modes bring out different things from different people. So it's a way of like, there's the open discussion format, there's the proposal, you know, what do you think about this proposal? There's these different decision things. So you can sort of flexibly use it to bring out the different perspectives, and then make a clear decision. And then everybody can just sort of take collective action, because one of the issues is with decision making sometimes is like, how do we know when it's over? How do we know when a decision has actually been made and I can actually act on that? How do I find out about the decision in the first place? So with Lumio, it's easier to, for example, get notified when a decision is underway, decide if you want to participate, and if you participate, be informed of the outcomes, or even if you don't participate, be informed of the outcomes and have a clear thing like, oh yeah, this has been decided now, so we can act on it. So those are some aspects to Lumio. There are, you know, it's not like the tool for everything. Like it can't, some groups who are quite small or meet together a lot in person maybe won't see the value of it as much, although I have seen a lot of groups get a really good online offline flow where basically Lumio enables them to make decisions between meetings, which is actually a really big deal, because then they can carry on the discussion, or if you're in the meeting and you don't have enough time to conclude, you can carry on the discussion back on Lumio and you get this cool flow back and forth. It's not a good solution if people on your team aren't into talking on the internet, basically. Like I have seen people try to deploy it in situations where people aren't that tech savvy, and it can be, I think, quite hard, but I don't think that's going to be a problem at Consensus.
And we're just looking now at a decision where there was a block.
Oh, yeah.
And just looking at, we had a couple of disagrees, we have an agree, an abstain. So we won't be able to talk too much about what that all means, but everything is there in the Lumio school and also the Inspiral handbook about how we use decisions. And I'm looking at an Inspiral decision. And yeah, we can go into this further if anyone wants to have a call to talk about Lumio as well. I'll come back now. Any quick questions on that, on Lumio from anyone before we jump into teams for the week?
Yeah, we have one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, go Thomas.
We use Lumio in Asia Pacific, in APAC, but we got into it for a while and then we stopped using it. What I did notice is that, I love it personally, but what I did notice is that it became like a place where people could vent if they weren't happy about a decision. And that was great, but then we've got dynamics in Asia Pacific where, especially under solutions, if we start venting, you know, in a way that's not, you know, in alignment maybe of finance or you know, certain power people in our region, you know, we've had someone taken off the team in Consensus, like actually fired because of a post that they put up, and it, you know, maybe the language wasn't perfect, but and it's definitely not to do with. But how do you see getting around the issues like that, or even though you can post a thing anonymously, and then how do you keep engaged? Like, yeah, there's a few challenges that we've come across, but.
Yeah, yeah, I won't lie and say that Lumio like always works or it's always easy. It does actually, I would say, require some thoughtful facilitation, just like an in-person decision-making meeting would. And what you say about people venting and stuff, that is something that comes up. I think that the number one tip I would give anybody who's like, how do I facilitate a good Lumio group? And also in your case, is use proposals. I see a lot of groups start open discussions and then just keep in that divergent phase for a long time. And oftentimes what happens is one person or a small group of people have a lot to say on the topic and other people start to disengage, or a really extreme voice that actually doesn't represent what most people think is like the one that's being heard the most or posting walls of text. But when you raise a proposal, it totally short circuits that. And what you'll end up revealing is like, oh, this person is the only one who actually thinks this way. And then you get this resounding voice of like, one of the like classic issues of online communication is the like power law distribution of participation, where you get like 1% of the people posting most of the content, like another 10% of the people like coming in and liking things, and like 90% of the people just lurking. Like so many.
That's I'm a lurker personally, like, but that's exactly the mirror of exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I'd say proposals are the number one what do we do about lurker solution, because it's like an explicit invitation to like press that button. And I just think it's what you're talking about are facilitation questions. And unfortunately, just like a group doesn't know how to like magically self-organize just because you say there's no bosses, groups don't know how to magically self-facilitate themselves until they get a chance to really practice it a while, or somebody who's skillful can help them, guide them through it.
Yeah, we're learning that on this course, and that's what we want to do more of, is how to facilitate and how to be facilitated. And sorry to cut you off, but we do need to send these lovely people into their teams to talk about how they're going to do the group assignment for this week, which is around decision making, and will involve you having to get together. No two ways about it this week. And there's also the individual assignment in there as well. And we'll be wanting to hear about both of those things in the call on Friday. And also, if I can just ask you in the teams for this week to talk to each other about how you're going to do your publishing for SO101, because we don't have time to do it now. So if you can all make a agreement to tell your group what channel or what mode you're going to make your blog or your whatever artifact that you produce, we'll do it in the team groups now. Sorry, Camilla, we don't have time for your question for Alana, but I'm hopeful that if it's burning, that she may respond via email or some other way.
Yeah, just put it in the chat if anybody wants to. Like, I'm obviously a huge nerd about this stuff and love talking about it. I could talk about this all day. But just get in touch if you want to, and I'm happy to chat. There's no, magic answers, but maybe we can work something out together.
Yeah, on behalf of everyone, Alana, that was super great. Thank you for coming along, and feel free to take your mics off and say thanks quickly, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elena.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you. And so we've gone a bit over, so you'll have, maybe if you can just take a couple of extra minutes in your team, and also check out with each other as well. So you just need to talk about how you're going to organize for the group assignment. Maybe you can figure out how you're going to publish later on when you meet again, and then just in your groups check out.
Kate, I have more requests.
Yeah.
Can one of you talk about the SO Dojo tomorrow morning and what we need there?
Not me. Lisa?
Sorry, I thought we'd had a discussion to invite. What we'd like to do as part of the dojo tomorrow is invite a couple of you at least to be on that call, so that you can give some sort of real world feedback on what your experience has been like for those that might be considering joining. So if you could pop into the Slack possibly, if you'd be up for that, it'd be really, really, really greatly appreciated. Thanks.
So is that clear, that we'd love if a couple of you could come hang out with us and just talk about what this is? And I'm assuming the invites and the times available in Slack.
I've seen it. Okay. It's at 4 a.m. for me, but if no one else is offering, I'm happy to do it, just because I'm so passionate about the rest of the mesh. Getting a pathway to these types of ways of communicating and things like that. And I think it means a lot for someone in Australia to show how important it is. I don't know.
Okay, if you're prepared, but it is your 4 a.m. and I'm assuming you're still a bit jet lagged, so perhaps
I'll probably be up because of the jet lag.
And we are taking your home group time. So if someone else, a couple of others could as well, it'd be great to just see if it works. And maybe we can just figure out who's coming in the Slack and we'll put you into your home groups now. But thanks for the offer, Thomas. That's super. That's really nice to hear. Samantha, you're going to do it?
Wait, what? Sorry, I was just saying yes, Thomas, because there's a lot of APIC efforts with self-organization being.
Well, you'll be there anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll put you onto your home groups, and please come back into the Slack to let us know if you can come hang out with us in the call tomorrow, and yeah, we'll have fun. Thanks, everyone.